What is the process of a new construction loan? When do you set up escrow? We're going to answer all these questions right now. How? Because we're talking real estate, real estate, real estate. Welcome to the Measure Twice, Cut Once podcast. I am your host, Brian Tessier, expert of all residential real estate in America. So my guest today is Laurie Nelson. Laurie, where'd you come from?
Hi, Brian. Excited to be on here. So I've been in the mortgage industry for 22 years. I'm specifically here in Pittsburgh, and I have been at Citizens Bank for the past 4+ years. So been at this for a long time.
Okay, so let's talk about new construction. What is a construction loan?
So a construction loan is, it's basically another type of mortgage. And the biggest difference being that you have a closing before the house exists versus after it's been built.
Totally different.
Yes. So basically you use a construction loan in order to obtain the funds to build the house, and the whole point is to have a closing and then start building.
Interesting. So where is the money throughout this whole process?
So,
if I'm the buyer, do I just get $1 million in my bank account?
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
So you would, typically someone would call me and ask, what's the process like? And my response is that it's not all that different than a regular mortgage in terms of how we structure the financing. You have a budget, you have a sales price, you've got some idea of what you're putting down. We do a pre-approval. Okay, that's the same as if you were buying a house that's there.
Yep.
And even just the way it gets financed is very similar. The biggest difference is you're involving a builder. They're going to provide you with the plans and the specs for the house that's going to be built.
Right.
So the appraisal is going to get done based on plans and specs. Okay. So typically they go out and take pictures of a house that's already there. It's similar, but it's done right from their desk. And we end up with an appraisal that is based on the, everything that the builder provided.
Right. And typically it appraises for the sales price.
Yeah. It's usually it's not that different than if you were doing a resale. So in terms of the funds and how that works.
Right. That's what I'm most curious about.
All right.
I want to know. I'm buying a $5 million house.
All right.
Do they just drop the money in my account, the builder's account? Who holds this money?
Okay. That's a great question. So when we start the process, we are working towards a closing, just like anyone else would. Okay. So ideally, we've got a builder contract, perhaps a lot contract. We've got the title company, we've got the real estate agent, and we've got the mortgage person here, and the buyers, of course.
Right.
So, and we're all working together. So it's, just like you work with your title company and your mortgage partner and your buyers, it's the same thing. We just throw in a builder. And so when we get to the closing, what typically happens is we will release the first draw. Okay, and the builder, go ahead.
Buyers had to put a down payment down?
Yes.
Is there, and maybe we're going to get to that later, but since you're going through the process step by step, I think it might be good to add it in now.
Okay.
And that is, how much down payment do I have to put down on new construction? Is it different than a conventional?
It's not that different,
Okay.
No, but I know you're familiar with new construction where you get the loan when the house is done.
Right.
Okay, that's very popular. So basically that mortgage is just one that you start maybe 9 months before you're actually going to close.
Sure.
When the house is complete, you have a closing. We're all familiar with that.
Right.
In this case, you're going to have a closing. Your closing costs and your down payment are due at the time of closing, but the house isn't there yet.
Interesting.
Okay, so now we have a mortgage in place. All right, so bottom line, when you come to closing, say you put 10% down. Okay.
And is there a minimum?
Yes, and it depends on credit score. I gotta careful what I say,
Understood.
but there are low down payment construction loans.
Right.
But let's say, for example, you're going to do 10% down. Okay, so you're going to usually give a deposit to the builder. Perhaps there'll be one to the developer too. There might be a small deposit on the lot contract, another deposit with the builder. All right. So that's like your earnest money, your hand money.
Cool.
Bottom line. Okay, next we're going to move through the process like we always would. When we get to the closing, the additional down payment, if they're putting 10% down and they, already gave just a few $1,000s, then the balance is due at closing.
Right.
The closing costs are due at closing, okay? But the loan we don't fund the whole loan. So if you borrow $1 million, Citizens isn't funding $1 million at the closing table because the house isn't there yet.
Right.
Well, it's not entirely dry.
Okay.
So the buyer's going to come with their down payment. They're going to pay their closing costs, and then we're going to give the builder their initial draw. Okay.
Awesome.
Which means typically the max initial draw you can do in a construction loan is 10%. So
what part of so I'm familiar with construction. Is it like the earth is flattened and pegged out and they get a draw, or is it like after the foundation is in, or is it before all that?
Typically it's before all that.
Because the builder needs the money in order. So that's a good...
Right.
The builder doesn't use any of his own money for this process.
You know what? It would be wrong to speak for the builder. I'm sure there are some that start the project before we close.
Okay, yeah.
It's not that you can't do that. I think the preference is to have the funding secured, the financing secured before they start digging. But it's not up to me.
It's not etched in stone. There's no
not.
one way that everybody does it.
Correct.
I would imagine, being a businessman, that most builders would prefer not to use their own money. But it's going to be case by case scenario.
Sure, especially in this market. You know what I mean?
100%.
So they don't, So I do think that a construction to permanent loan, which is like the technical name for it, and then we refer to the loan that you get if the house is 100% done, is an end loan. I think that developers and builders are probably starting to favor the construction to permanent loan, just because it does alleviate them funding an entire project with their own money, or their bank's money.
Sure.
They're not usually spending cash.
So let's get back to the first draw.
Okay.
What point in time does that usually show up?
Okay, so builder has a choice. We'll allow up to 10% of the total project to be funded as an initial draw at closing, which means they get money, aside from the down payment that they've, that down payment goes to them. They could get a 10% right at the closing. Some take it, some don't. Doesn't, you know what I mean? Some aren't starting the next day too.
Oh, that's true.
So they might wait, you know what I mean? You might not be breaking ground for 2 more months, so you might not pull the money just yet.
And me as the buyer, I'm completely out of this whole process after closing, right?
Well, not entirely. I mean, you can be, again. Right. So what happens as far as the funds, though, while we're on that, is, if you borrowed an $800,000, mortgage, typically as soon as you closed, you would owe principal, interest, taxes, and insurance on the mortgage. You have a mortgage payment.
Right.
I mean, we just shelled out the money.
Right.
So during a construction loan, once you go to the closing and put that, whatever your down payment is, you're only going to make interest-only payments based on the draw. Right. So if the initial draw is $100,000, in probably about 45 days, you're going to get an interest-only payment or bill for the interest only on that portion of the loan.
And that goes to the lender.
Yes, the interest goes to the lender.
Right, but
because we're giving the money to the builder to use, and then we'll charge the interest on that portion.
Right.
Buyer makes the payment. Maybe we go a couple more months, they pull out another $100,000. Now you've got a $200,000 mortgage. You pay interest only on that. So the nice thing about that is if you have a house to sell and you're still making a mortgage payment,
which most probably will. If you're building a house, you gotta live somewhere. Right.
So you are going to make very small incremental payments while the house is being built.
Interesting.
Yes. So
and the buyer's out of the process as far as the draw. Like the bank and the builder, will the builder say, okay, I've gotten to this point, we needed the draw number 2, and they talk to the bank about that, or do they talk to the buyer and the bank?
They can be involved. They can be involved as they want to.
Right.
Truthfully, we've got a software system set up where it's completely transparent.
Right.
So the buyer can follow along they can see everything that's going on between the bank and the builder.
Oh, cool.
So if the builder requests a draw, they can see that. If they request an inspection, they can see that.
So there's like some
if a payment's coming, they can see that.
Some sort of platform that each lender has you log in.
Yep, it's called Built. Yeah, so it is. It's where the builders request the draws. It's where we fund it. It's pretty cool to follow along. And I tell people, you're going to get a login. You could follow along. I'll have some people that will watch that, like a hawk, and then some people that have never even logged on. It's just all depends.
We know real estate. Everybody is different. I have some people that don't give a crap about how the process goes, and I have some that want to tell me how the process goes.
Exactly. So, but it's cool because I think it makes people feel more involved.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
If you're spending that kind of money too, I mean, every market's different, but when you're building brand new construction, you're probably not building a $300,000 house.
They're out there, but I think that as the market changes, it's just harder and harder to do that.
So back to the process, is there a certain level how many draws are there typically, and is there a certain level the builder has to get to get the next draw?
The builder's in control of the draw schedule.
Oh, wow. The bank doesn't just say, "Oh, hold on, you just asked for help."
No, I mean they're pretty common. I mean they work in phases, and I think they're all pretty similar. Some do 4 or 5 draws, and some do 6 or 7. I don't usually see much more than that.
Okay.
And I also just think it's convenience, because every time you need a new draw, there is an inspector that goes out.
Right.
And basically that's for everybody's sake, I guess.
Right.
It's to make sure that all the work that was supposed to be done was done before we release another draw.
Does the inspector cost money every time he goes out?
So yes, the inspector does cost money. However, it is part of your closing costs in the construction.
So the buyer pays for that, not the builder?
Yeah, they do. They have inspections. We build in like certain number of inspections, in our closing cost sheet, and typically they don't exceed them. It's pretty standard now.
Right.
So I would say maybe 5 or 6 draws.
Okay. Yeah, because new construction's taken off. I mean, with these pandemic times.
Yeah.
So let's get to the end. How do we finally, the house is done? How do we finally button this up as a buyer? What am I looking for?
So when the house is done, that's what's really easy. Is the loan is just going to naturally convert into a fully amortized principal, interest, taxes, and insurance.
Really?
So all that's not due until the house is completely done, occupancy permit, ready to move in. And usually it takes a good 45 to 60 days before you get that first mortgage payment.
Interesting.
Much like if you closed before.
Right. So to sum it up to a first-time buyer that knows nothing about the process, they're kind of renting that money during the build process.
Sorta. I guess.
If it's interest only, right?
Yeah. I mean they're just paying interest on the amount that the builder needs at the time. Right. So, you know what I mean?
So how long does one have to actually build? How long does the process typically take? Is there a minimum, maximum? Is there penalties?
All right, these are great questions. So the standard construction financing is set up with a 12-month build period, and that starts when you close.
Right.
So typically I'd lock someone in for 90 days. So between when they start the idea of doing this and when they actually have the closing, which we've talked about, it gives them a good 90 days to get that put together. Once they have a closing, that's when the build period starts. So the clock starts on that.
All right.
So we'll offer 12-month build periods, 15-month build periods, 18-month build periods, and so on. So typically in your construction contract, it's going to have a time frame. So we want to make sure that we lock you in for the correct build period.
And who has that conversation? The buyer and the builder? I mean, the builder would be the one that has that info and how long they think it's going to take to...
Yes. So typically I would ask the buyer, what did you discuss with your builder about it as far as the time frame goes? I'd also read the construction contract, which typically, it usually has that time frame in there.
Interesting.
And although I think a lot of lenders have been extremely flexible due to COVID with extending,
I was going to ask you that. Another question, but let's just get right into it. Because all my construction has been delayed by a couple months. Right. Multiple closings have been delayed. Some of them we've delayed 4 different times.
Right. I know. So it's been hard.
How is the new construction loan process adapted to that, or have they?
Well,
flexibility?
I'll tell you what, it was a lot easier to adapt to it last year than it will be this year.
Really? Well, we're still having problems.
No, I think that rates were they've been so low for the last 2 years, and now we're in a rising rate environment.
Yeah, but I mean, we still have material shortages, and closings are still getting delayed. How does that affect the contract?
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying I think it was a lot easier for most lending institutions to be flexible with extending the rate lock because the rates weren't going up as much. I think that, it's all very fluid. I think that the supply chain issue is probably not going to be a good excuse anymore to get free. I think a lot of the extensions were specifically for COVID, and now that this is more of a reality, I'm I can't.
We've
You
been
know, I'm
living
not
in it
really
for a while.
sure. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that, you know, built into any contract is going to be some type of cost to extend. And
So just to put it in frame, depends when you're watching this podcast and this video. We are at a very low interest rate. We're not going to talk about the interest rate, and they're in the process of going up. So that's kind of why we're talking about it. So if you're watching this in 2024, this segment is just not going to apply to you. But if you're watching it in 2022, it very much applies to you because we are having these issues. So we were, everybody was taken off guard. You're saying in 2021, lenders are saying, hey, I shouldn't be taken off guard in 2022, 2023. So we're going to be less flexible, and the interest rates are going up. Pretty much is what you're saying.
yeah.
Boom.
Ooh, while we're on rates, can I just, I'm going to throw one thing in there.
Yep.
And I'm definitely not talking about rates for very long.
Mm-hmm.
However, kind of a neat thing about construction loans, it's different than an end loan, is that if you're going to close on a house that hasn't been built yet, you're going to lock in the rate today.
Oh, very good.
And you can lock in a rate for, up to a year for a house that's being built, but it might actually be a more attractive rate to do a construction loan right now.
And that's because the interest rates are going up. But what if interest rates were going down? Would you not lock it?
No, I mean, we still lock it. It's just when we kind of got on the subject of extensions,
right.
And I think that conversation might change this year. I don't know, but
Okay.
I know that, most people have been flexible
Interesting.
over
Yeah.
COVID.
Flexibility would be nice.
Yeah, well, I'm rooting for it. But
So let's talk about lots and two closings versus one closing, etc. So let's just say I am a buyer and I hired an agent. Wow. I found you a lot that you love. Happens all the time. And then you want to close on that, but you want to bring your builder to your lot. Do you have to have two closings, or how does that scenario work out?
okay, so that scenario can work out a couple different ways.
Options.
Yeah. So you may have, you might find a lot and put a deposit down on it, and then you find a builder. So you've got a lot contract, you got a construction contract. We are able to merge those into one big sales price
Right.
and have a closing on both simultaneously.
Okay.
Okay.
Is there an advantage or a disadvantage?
To me, it doesn't really make a difference. Sometimes I think it's very simplified to just have one closing.
I think so too.
yeah.
Would there be more closing costs if you had two closings? No, because it's the same.
Not a lot, maybe a little, but not a lot.
Right.
So, but you might already own the lot, okay? And in that
True.
case, heck. So if you already own the lot,
Yeah.
whatever that lot is worth is equity towards your build.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So
Does it have to get appraised?
the lot doesn't get appraised, but when we do the appraisal, it's going to incorporate the value of the land with the house that's on there.
I'm trying to figure out
so
how
it's factored in.
How would they figure out the equity? Let's just say, my grandparents gave me this lot. I didn't buy it.
Right.
It was just handed to me, gifted to me. How do we determine what the value would be?
So basically, it's going to be the appraisal.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's the appraised value is going to give some kind of significance to both the land and the house. So
Interesting. And that's going to be a common thing with these new construction loans is typically most people have their lot, are going to buy their lot, or the builder has that. That's really the only
Right.
three options, I would think.
right. So and you could also buy the lot in advance, and then you have to provide the deed that shows that you own the lot, and then you meet with the builder, and
Yeah, some
we
people
just-
like to buy the lots cash because lots depends where you're buying, of course, in the United States, but typically aren't that expensive unless you're
Right.
buying in Lawrenceville.
I mean, I actually don't know how hard it is to get
Yeah.
land. You'd know better than me.
It's hard. Contact me. So let's talk about escrows. When you set them up, when do they come into play? How are they? Well, for buyers that have never heard of an escrow, and it's not escargot, it's escrow. What is an escrow? Give me escrow 101.
Escrow 101. Escrow 101. Escrow is basically a fund that the lender holds that they use to pay your taxes and insurance.
Tax insurance. Can't get away from that.
So if you escrow your taxes and insurance, that means included in your mortgage payment, you're going to have your principal, your interest, your homeowner's insurance, and your taxes.
Holy mackerel.
Yeah.
That's a lot of
So
There are HOA fees in there?
not in your escrow. You pay that on your own. Was that a test?
That was a test.
It was a test. I could tell. So everyone who is has seen an estimate or a closing disclosure in this area knows that if you're escrowing, you usually see a pretty big chunk of money on your closing disclosure. Usually you have to repay a little bit to the seller. You have to fund your escrow account. There might be taxes due. So there's a lot of, the taxes due at closing are often fairly.
Why would you repay anything to the seller? I'm a buyer that has never done this. I don't understand. Why would I do that?
Because if you move in on March 15th and the sellers have paid the school taxes through September 1st, you're going to have to reimburse them for the months that they didn't live there.
Right. Everything's per diem in the real estate industry.
There's a lot of back and forth with taxes.
Yeah.
I think that when I go over estimates with buyers, the escrow is the biggest question they always have. Why are you collecting so much money for
It's
taxes?
the most confusing. Is it a year up front or something like that?
It's technically, we make it look like it's a year up front, but part of that goes back to the seller. Some of it might be for taxes that are due. And truly, your escrow is always going towards future taxes and insurance.
Right.
So when you do a construction loan, when you set up at the closing, I mean, there's no house there yet, so there are hardly any taxes.
Right.
So there's very minimal taxes. So we do not establish an escrow account at the closing.
There's times when I list new construction that hasn't been built yet. The taxes are like $150, and the property's going to be $700,000. And people are like, "Oh my God, the taxes are so cheap." I'm like, "Yeah, they're so cheap."
Right.
No, I have to ultimately disclose. We have to figure out what, for you buyers out there, we have to figure out what the taxes are going to be for closing, because you need to know that kind of stuff.
Right.
And a lot of times we don't figure out ahead of time. From a realtor standpoint, is because we don't know what the sale price is really. I mean, we may say it's $800,000, but maybe we accept $795 or something like that.
Right. The assessed value doesn't kick in until much later.
Yeah, and theoretically, your buyer's agent is responsible for getting the buyer the estimate or the taxes, and sometimes the buyer's agent does the calculations themselves based on the sale price once it's established. And sometimes, like me, I go to the lender and I'm like, "Here's the property, here's what the sale price is. Stick it in your little computer, crank it up, and tell me what it is."
We don't want you messing with too many numbers.
It's so funny.
Stay in your lane.
I'm gonna diverge a little bit here. You've ever taken your real estate license? I've taken it in Florida and Pittsburgh, and they still, to this day, make you figure out a mortgage without a calculator by hand. And I'm here to tell you, buyers, realtors should not ever figure out anything money related except their commission statement. Everything else should be done by the lender or the closing company. So it still blows I'm ranting. That's my mind blowing. I would never do it by hand anyway. I would use an online, I do a Zillow or online tool.
Speaking of Florida, I am licensed to do construction lending in Florida.
So you're talking to two people that are licensed in the state of Pennsylvania and Florida. Shameless plug. You want to follow me at Brian Sells Miami on Instagram.
Absolutely.
Are you on Instagram?
Lending with Laurie.
How do you spell Laurie?
Laurie.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
So what exactly is different about construction escrow?
Okay. Big difference is no houses there, so there aren't many taxes due. You're gonna have to pay taxes on the lot during construction. There's gonna be no escrow set up initially. It would be silly for us to hold a whole bunch of money for taxes. They're potentially not gonna be due for over a year.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So the escrow is set up when the house is 100% done.
Wow.
Yes.
Good to know.
So I think it's especially nice if you have a house to sell and you're trying to not put a lot down up front. That's something that, we have to talk about how that's going to come eventually. Like sooner or later it's coming, but it's nice that you don't have to do that until the house is completely built.
Yeah, and if you're paying attention, buyers, she's made a couple good points that should put you at ease if you have a house to sell. I mean, let's face it, you either live with your parents, which is not a problem. I've done that till I was in my 20s. You rent, which of course you have a lot more flexibility, or you own a home. So she's given a couple points already that should kind of ease your mind on the whole construction process. If you weren't paying attention, rewatch the podcast. So I don't know if you're qualified to talk about it, but let's talk about insurance. What kind of insurance is needed on new construction? The process.
So the builder's going to have builder's liability insurance. It's going to really cover everything during construction. But technically you own that lot. That's your lot and that's your land. So not just the bank, but I believe the builder too is going to require you have some of your own insurance. And it's basically like a homeowner's insurance policy with an endorsement called builder's risk.
I was going to say, who would I contact? If I'm a buyer, who do I contact?
Your homeowner's insurance agent. It's basically you get a policy with builder's risk endorsement on there. And once the house is complete, that endorsement goes away.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
That was easy.
It is.
That was the easiest part of the whole conversation.
Right? And so that is, I said you don't have to pay any taxes up front necessarily, but you will be responsible for, you have to have that in place usually, before they start building.
Right.
So
and that's not terribly expensive.
No, I mean, you pay the year and you're done.
Right. Okay, so the last question I want to pose to you is something called infill. For those of you that don't know what infill is, that is, and this is happening a lot in dense areas where we need to knock down the house in order to erect a brand new one. I know down in Miami, Lauderdale, that's huge. They knock down $10 million ones and put up $40 million ones. Pittsburgh, we knocked down $70,000 ones and put up $370,000 ones. So how can we use a construction loan for something like that? And
Absolutely.
where does that come in?
Absolutely. So it's not terribly different. The financing that we went over, all the same. Basically, you're gonna get a builder. Or maybe an architect, maybe both. Some do both.
Right.
And you're going to design what you want to do when the house is taken down and rebuilt. And we're going to follow the exact same process. So the tear down will be included in the cost in the construction contract. And we're going to do an appraisal based on the new house. We'll fund it just like we did anything else. So it can be used absolutely to rebuild.
So it'll be a little bit more money because you have to tear down the house and probably haul the materials away, I would imagine.
It is. I mean, I think it's different. I've done a few of them in Pittsburgh,
Okay.
and I didn't notice a big cost, but I actually, truthfully, I don't pay as much attention to that
Right.
part.
Yeah.
I stick with the numbers and the financing, and the builders are the experts.
Yeah, it makes total sense.
So.
Well, I'm going to thank you for coming in. I learned a
great.
lot. Did you guys learn a lot? Wherever you're watching this, make sure you comment below. Send me a DM with any questions you have. Make sure you find Laurie. We're going to put her contact info up at the end for anything residential real estate related in Florida and Pennsylvania.
Right on.
Awesome. Good job.
Thanks, Brian.
You're welcome.
This was fun.
Cool.
Better than I thought. I do.